Good afternoon, everyone. How's it going? Had some plans for videos to be making this week, but the Seahawks went and took a bulldozer to it because of this now very compelling, or, well, somewhat compelling defensive coordinator hunt. And while the end result might not change the team's fate in 2022 drastically, I feel like this is pretty interesting to see the mentality that Pete Carroll has. So I want to explore the prime candidates that we've been presented so far. So I want to dive into Ed Donatel specifically, going over his whole career. And we've got like 31 seasons just looking at the NFL experience. So we're going to dive in here real quick, but I want to take a look at what Donatel has done in his career as a coach. He spent a lot of time as a secondary coach, so I want to take a very close look at what he's done at the safety position. Because like I said this morning, I think the most important thing that a defensive coordinator coming into Seattle needs to do is figure out how to get more out of Jamal Adams. Because I know Jamal Adams is an all-world player. I know he can be the best safety in the league. I know he's unique, one of a kind, and to a certain extent, that's the problem. It's hard to find guys who have worked with somebody like a Jamal Adams because there just aren't that many Jamal Adamses in the world. The way they play and the way they excel is so different. But I want to take a look at what Ed Donatel has done over his career, specifically with safeties. We're also going to take a look at one or two other things, but I just kind of want to review his career to this point. And like I said, it's 30 years, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. Now, the first thing I want to say is that there's a lot about the idea of hiring Ed Donatel that I do like. I think he would have some autonomy running the defense because of his experience. I think that especially recently, a Fangio disciple, he would be able to do a lot of the things that the Seahawks defense seems like they want to do. I will say, one thing that gives me pause is it seems like he's a big cover two guy. And I just don't know if Jamal Adams is going to get maximized in the cover two. But there's a lot of room for changing things a little bit here and there within the cover two defense. So they can probably find a way, but that gives me a little bit of pause. If we're going to have a Jamal Adams, I would much prefer to have somebody like a Brian Flores who is going to run a crazy, hybrid, intricate, weird defense. If Ed Donatel's just coming here to run cover two stuff or I mean, basically, you guys understand what I'm saying. Jamal Adams playing as a deep safety, that's not nearly as exciting, and I don't know how well it's going to work. But nevertheless, Ed Donatel has a really good resume. Let's take a look here. Okay, so his NFL career started in 1990 with the New York Jets under defensive coordinator Pete Carroll. This is where they have a connection. So the 1990 New York Jets had a below average ish defense, not very good, 17th, and there weren't 32 teams back then, by the way. So it was a little below average. Not terrible. Their pass defense was basically the same. It's not really good, not really bad, just okay. One thing I want to draw attention to here is that while Donatel was a Jets secondary coach, because that was the role he filled there, he was the secondary coach, they had two notable safeties. And one of them, by the name of Brian Washington, played the entire time that Donatel was with the Jets for the Jets. So Brian Washington was a 5-year Jet, so he was there the whole time Donatel was there. And he played in almost every game over these 5 years, strong safety, and he had 18 interceptions, 6 forced fumbles, 8 fumble recoveries, 4 sacks, and 460 tackles. Really, really good numbers from your strong safety over a 5-year span. Now, he never made a Pro Bowl, never made an All-Pro team. He was never recognized as one of the best players in the league. But he was maybe the best player on the Jets defense over this 5-year span, I would say. So that is something that I'm going to take note of, and that's something that is going to stand out to me a little bit. Now, Donatel didn't directly develop Washington because he started his career in Cleveland, but he certainly helped. And the other safety that was there when Donatel took over the secondary was Eric McMillan. He had some success with the Jets. Now, he was with the Jets before Donatell got there. He was there for 2 previous years and actually made 2 Pro Bowls. But he continued to have success the first 2 years of Donatell. 5 interceptions in 1990, and he had 3 in 1991, and then he got hurt, and his career was basically over. Really promising career here, by the way, if you take a look at it. Pro Bowl his first 2 seasons, and then out like a light. Just injuries, man. So that's something that I took note of when I was looking at Donatell. He does have a history of working with some pretty good safeties. And as for the rest of his Jets tenure, in 1991, the defense was good. The pass defense was decent-ish. 1992, the Jets took a step back as a team. Their defense was below average, approaching bad. And then in 1993, the defense was actually one of the better ones in the league. They were 6th in points allowed, and they had a good pass defense. And in 1994, with Pete Carroll taking over as head coach, they were average again. And at that point, Donatell moved on. Okay, now this is where Donatell kind of really made his name, I guess you could say. It wasn't with the Jets, although with the Jets he did have some success to do some things well. By the way, he actually had Ronnie Lott for a couple years when he was coaching the Jets. Not the good Ronnie, not the elite Ronnie Lott, but still a pretty decent version of him. So he crossed paths with Ronnie Lott for a couple years. But it was with the Broncos, starting in 1995, that Donatell started to make his name in the NFL, so to speak. The first year, 1995, Broncos did not do that well. Their defense was average-ish, 17th in points, 15th in yards. Their pass defense was pretty good outside of the complete lack of interceptions. But one thing that I really want to draw attention to his Broncos stint was that he had some pretty notable safeties. First was Steve Atwater, a Hall of Famer and member of the All 1990s team, 2-time All-Pro, 8-time Pro Bowl. Steve Atwater was already there when Donatell came over, so it's not like he developed him, but he did have good seasons under Donatell. He made 3 Pro Bowls out of the 4 seasons he was still with the Broncos. He had, hold on, let me pull this up here, 9 interceptions. He had 242 tackles. He was one of the better safeties in the league for sure, and the last year that Donatell was with the Broncos, he went over to the Jets, so I guess in the long term they swapped places. And the other safety, the opposite safety to Atwater, was Tyrone Braxton, who, who was also somebody who was actually somebody who spent most of his early career with the Broncos as a cornerback, went to Miami for 1 year, and then came back in 1995 as a safety with Donatell. And over the 5 years that Donatell was there, he played pretty much every game. He had 16 interceptions. He made a Pro Bowl, 277 tackles, 6 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, a sack and a half. He was a very solid safety for the Broncos over this 5-year period. So there's another notable safety from the 90s that Donatell got to coach. Anyway, 1996, the Broncos were 13-3, a lot better. They had a top 7 they were 7th in the league in points allowed, 4th in yards, really good defense, pretty good against the pass as well. 1997, this was the first Super Bowl. They had elite defense in terms of yards and points, and their passing defense was still relatively solid. 1998, 14-2, they won the Super Bowl, and they had a good defense, no longer elite, but still 8th in points. They gave up a decent chunk in the passing game, but still pretty solid. And finally, 1999, the bottom falls out. Defense is still pretty good, but Donatell would move on after this season. But he was moving on to bigger and better things. After his relatively good success in Denver, winning 2 Super Bowls and being part of some really good defenses, he got a promotion going to the Green Bay Packers in 2000 to be their defensive coordinator. And that first year, Packers were just okay. They went 9-7. Their defense was roughly middle of the league. Their pass defense was Their run defense was pretty stout. And overall, there were some nice safeties that passed through Green Bay during this time. The first, Darren Sharper, one of the best safeties of his era. 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro. He made the All-2000s team. I guess he'll never make the Pro Bowl because of his off-the-field issues. But during the 3 years that Darren Sharper was with Donatell in, I'm sorry, excuse me, 4 years. Sorry, guys, I've been looking at a lot of numbers tonight. It may have been the best 4 years of his career. This 4-year period, he made the All-Pro team twice. He made the once. He made the All-Pro team twice. 27 interceptions, 57 passes defensed, 3 forced fumbles, 5 sacks, 265 tackles. So I said I wanted to focus on the safeties that Donatell worked with in his career. This was a great one. A really special safety he had for these 4 years. It's a shame we have to remember him for certain other things. And Leroy Butler was the other safety, and obviously he was a great player, but his career had kind of... It had fallen off pretty hard by the time Donatell showed up. It was his last 2 years. He had one more pretty good year in 2000, had 2 interceptions, 6, 7 passes defensed, and then he got hurt and retired the next year. So anyway, the 2001 Packers were a lot better. They went 12-4. They had a top 5 defense in points allowed. They were pretty good in against the run and the pass. So that's a pretty credible result for Donatell. But one thing I really want to draw attention to is one of the players that he helped develop, which is Kabir Jabala Bilamila, or KGB, as everyone tended to call him back then. He was somebody that the Packers had drafted when Donatell first got there, and in 2001, his second year, he went off for 13.5 sacks. So if you're taking a look at the prospect of trying to develop Darrell Taylor, maybe this is something you can point to as an encouraging sign. He was able to develop KGB so well back in 2001, turn him into one of the best sack artists in the league, somebody who would go on to make a Pro Bowl, somebody who would go on to have almost 75 career sacks despite not having that long of a career. And this is a 5th-round pick, by the way, so good development. All right, so in 2002, the Packers were really good again. They went 12-4. Donatell's defense was good, a little above average, 12th. They were strong against the pass for the most part, not so great against the run. And then in 2003, the Packers were good again, and their defense was slightly above average. So nothing that Donatell would be super proud of. And of course, this was the year of 4th and 26, which ended up being the thing that really lost Ed Donatell his job. And the only safety of note from this section of his career was Marquise Anderson, who came in for Leroy Butler for the last 2 years. He had 1 solid year as a strong safety, 4 interceptions for the 2002 Packers. And that's really about it from this part. Not great, but not bad either. Decent 4-year run as a defensive coordinator, and he ultimately lost his job mostly because of one really bad play. All right, so now he got hired by the Atlanta Falcons in 2004, and his results there were mixed. In 2004, the Falcons were good, but their defense was roughly middle of the road. They were 14th, just slightly above average, and the only player that I feel like we can really talk about for his Falcons tenure would be D'Angelo Hall. D'Angelo Hall was a very young cornerback when Donatell showed up in Atlanta. He was a 1st-round pick in 2004, and under Donatell, Hall became a Pro Bowler the next 2 seasons, 05 and 06. So this is a cornerback that he is doing a really good job developing. D'Angelo Hall would go on to become one of the most prolific interception artists, if that's a phrase. I don't know if it is, over the rest of his career. 43 career interceptions, which is really good for the modern NFL. So you can credit Ed Donatell for developing D'Angelo Hall well. Now, Hall was a top 10 pick, but still somebody had to develop him. He did have guys like Patrick Kearney, but Patrick Kearney was a great player before Donatell got there, so you can't really say he developed him. That's just somebody he crossed paths with. Anyway, the 2005 Falcons were mediocre, and their defense was a little below average. hanging around average overall, 18th. And the 2006 defense was average-ish again. And at this point, Donatell lost his job and had to kind of step back and regroup. He spent a year with the New York Jets as an assistant. He spent a year with the Washington Huskies and went 0-12, which some of you guys may have negative memories of, but I mean, it was 14 years ago. I'm willing to forgive and forget. Hopefully, you guys are too. Okay, so now that takes us to the NFL once again. The 2009 Denver Broncos went 8-8 with the first-year coach Josh McDaniels. So Donatell was the secondary coach under Josh McDaniels for these 2 years. This first year, they were good, 12th in the league in points, a little above average maybe, 7th in yards. He did have two future Hall of Fame secondary players here, Champ Bailey and Brian Dawkins, but those guys were great before Donatell ever got anywhere near them. They didn't have career years under him or anything like that, so I don't think you can give him a bunch of credit for Dawkins and Champ Bailey. Those guys, they are all-time greats with or without Donatell. And besides, in 2010, in year two, things absolutely collapsed. Donatell was purged along with a lot of other coaches involved with this team. They had the worst defense in the league. They had a not very good at all pass defense. There wasn't a whole lot to write home about with this Broncos defense. Their secondary, they still had, I believe, Dawkins and Champ Bailey, but again, we can't give Donatell credit for that. So at this point, Donatell went to work under Jim Harbaugh and Vic Fangio in San Francisco, and that went really well for him, went really well for all parties involved. Only thing missing was a Super Bowl, but Donatell went to work as a secondary coach under Vic Fangio, and the results were pretty stellar. That first year, they were second in the league in points allowed, fourth in yards. Their pass defense was quite solid overall. Their run defense was actually elite all world, but their pass defense was solid. And again, I wanted to take a look at the safeties that he got to work with while he was there. Deshaun Goldson, a fourth-round pick, ended up having a pretty good run with the 49ers before he got his money in Tampa Bay. Now, look, Deshaun Goldson was there before Ed Donatell, but under Donatell, Goldson made 2 Pro Bowls and an All-Pro team over this 2-year period where he had 9 interceptions, 110 tackles, 21 pass deflections. Really good. And then he got paid, went off to Tampa Bay, and you didn't hear so much from him. And the other safety when Donatell showed up was Dante Whitner. You may remember Dante Hittner. I don't know if he ever legally changed his name. Now, he was a blue-chip prospect. The Bills drafted him in the top 10 years before Donatell got to him in Frisco. Nevertheless, under Donatell, he made his first ever Pro Bowl and had some of his better years. 3 interceptions over this 2 years. 5 interceptions over this 3-year span under Donatell. Was one of the better safeties in the league, I would say. And then he went to Cleveland and got paid, and you didn't hear as much from him again. Okay, so after that, 2012, the Niners really good again. They made the Super Bowl, second in the league in points, third in the league in yards allowed. Really good passing defense. The 2013 49ers, I think we as Seahawks fans remember this team quite well. They made it to the NFC title game, had a number 3 defense. Their pass defense was again good. And this year they added Eric Reed as one of their starting safeties. He took over for Goldson, I believe, and he immediately made the Pro Bowl as a rookie with 4 interceptions, 11 PDs, and he would go on to have another good year in 2014, 3 interceptions, 7 pass deflections, and he would have probably his best years under Ed Donatell. So this is the kind of stuff that is really encouraging to me looking at the prospect of hiring Donatell as a defensive coordinator. 2014, obviously, the Niners were not as good, but they still had a top 10 defense. It was top 5 in yards. Pass defense was still good. And he did cross paths with Antoine Bethea for a year in San Francisco. Obviously, Bethea had his best years with Indy, but he did make the Pro Bowl in 2014 with the 49ers. He had 4 interceptions, 10 pass deflections, a sack, 86 tackles, so had a really good year. So repeatedly we are finding Fangio crossing paths with some really good safeties. Some of them he develops, some of them he inherits, some of them he just kind of crosses paths with, but over and over again he is working with some pretty notable safeties. Now, I want to repeat, Jamal Adams is different from most other safeties, but nevertheless, this is encouraging to me. So at this point, Donatel went over to the Chicago Bears under Fangio, so he basically sticking with Fangio like glue. Sorry if you guys can hear my pets in the background; they get a little ornery sometimes. The defense below average. We went over some of this stuff this morning when I talked about the potential Desai hire. And Adrian Amos would be the one of the players of note that he worked with during this time in Chicago. Adrian Amos, not a Pro Bowler or an All Pro or anything like that, but he has had a pretty good career, and he is somebody that Donatel can be credited somewhat for developing. First couple years, he wasn't well. He was a decent player, but in 2017 and 2018, he started becoming a little bit more than that. So this is an example of a player that Donatel can be credited with developing a little bit. And as for the rest of his Bears tenure, 2016, the Bears were terrible. Their defense was well below average to bad. 2017, they were good, so things starting to turn in the right direction. And at this point, he also took over Eddie Jackson and developed him into a guy who would eventually make an All Pro and two straight Pro Bowls. So there's another elite safety that Ed Donatel got to work with. And this all culminated in 2018 when the Bears go 12-4, have the number one defense in the league, and this is the year that Eddie Goldman made All Pro, excuse me, and it, again, you're just seeing a lot of the best safeties in the league during this era cross paths with Ed Donatel, and that gives me some encouragement. All right, so at this point, Vic Fangio went to be the head coach of the Broncos, and Donatel decided to follow him over to be their defensive coordinator. And the results overall for the Broncos were mixed. In 2019, they had a top 10 defense. It was not elite, not great, but it was good. It was a good defense. And the safeties that Donatel worked with were actually pretty solid. Justin Simmons, who now currently has the second heftiest safety contract in the NFL history, I think. He was partially developed underneath Fangio and Donatel, although he was already making a name for himself before then. But these last 2 years, where Justin Simmons has 5 interceptions a season, where he's really started to make a name for himself as one of the best defensive players in the league, have been under Donatel and Fangio. So there's another encouraging sign. These 3 years that he's spent under Fangio and Donatel, he's played in every game. He has 14 interceptions, 36 pass deflections, sack and a half, 200 tackles. Really, really notable stuff. And the other safety that Donatel worked with here was Kareem Jackson, who had been in the NFL for quite some time. He came over with Fangio and Donatel from Houston when they came over from Chicago, and moved from corner to safety and proceeded to put together 3 decent years. He played most of the games, 4 interceptions, 16 pass deflections, a sack, 177 tackles. Pretty good. Not one of the best safeties in the league, but a pretty solid one. The 2020 Broncos had an awful defense, 25th in the league overall, 21st in yards, not good. But the most recent Broncos defense, 2021, was actually really good, third in the league in points, eighth in yards. And generally speaking, they held together really well despite making a mid-year trade of Von Miller. So there's some stuff to like here, there's some stuff to not like here, but the thing that I'm really hanging my hat on is that Ed Donatel has been around a lot of really good safeties in his career. Steve Atwater, Brian Dawkins, Justin Simmons, Leroy Butler, Darren Sharper, a lot of big names there. Eddie Jackson, and hopefully he can bring that here in 2022, working with Jamal Adams, because to me that's the most important thing. All right, so there's your rundown of Ed Donatel's career as an NFL coach. Let me know what you guys think. I will be getting out of here. See you guys later. Peace out. Go Hawks. This is kind of encouraging me, admittedly.